cold fog slithered through the stone corridors of castles long abandoned, where the echoes of anguished cries lingered in the air, trapped between the walls like a shadow that refused to fade. It was here, beneath the flickering torchlight, that the rack of eternal agony took its place, a silent monarch of torment, whose reach extended across the kingdoms of medieval Europe, a device of exquisite cruelty and relentless precision. Its presence was a question whispered through the ages. How could human flesh and spirit endure such relentless stretching? Before succumbing to despair, in the damp, torchlit chambers of 14th century fortresses, the air was thick with the scent of cold stone and old iron. The corridors, lined with heavy oak doors, led to small, windowless rooms where the dim glow of candlelight cast long, quivering shadows. Outside, the murmur of distant guards and the hushed steps of courtiers carried rumors of justice and betrayal. Inside, silence ruled, broken only by the soft creak of rope and the measured turning of wooden rollers. The mechanical heart of the rack, each rotation tightening its grip upon the living. The rack itself was a simple yet horrifying construction, a wooden frame, sturdy and unyielding, with rollers at either end. Victims, accused of treachery, heresy, or debts to powerful lords, were stripped and bound upon it, their wrists and ankles secured, their bodies positioned with precision to ensure that each pull would stretch muscles, ligaments, and joints beyond the body's natural limit. As the rollers turned, limbs lengthened and bowed in unnatural angles. The eyes of the accused bulged with panic, teeth ground in silent agony. Spines curved under a force both mechanical and relentless. Courtiers watched in solemn silence, recording confessions that would echo through history, their pens dripping in the metaphorical blood of fear. Some tales tell of knights accused of betrayal, their loyalty questioned by jealous rivals or ambitious monarchs. On the rack, their bodies cried in ways that tongues could not express, voices lost in the stony vaults above. Other stories speak of villagers accused of heresy, peasants who dared whisper against the church, their bodies suspended between life and death as the rack demanded truths, often fabricated under pain. Each rotation of the rollers brought revelations, lies, or silence, binding the living in a dialogue with torment itself. The rack demanded obedience, extracting not only confessions, but the very essence of fear. The crescendo of agony was both intimate and public. The flesh stretched until muscles screamed in silent symphonies of suffering. Joints threatened to unhinge, and the mind hovered between consciousness and void. And yet, even at the brink, some bodies refused to betray their masters. Some spirits held secrets that would never be known. It was a cruel meditation on human endurance and the malleability of truth. Under relentless pressure, by candlelight, the faces of courtiers reflected a mixture of fascination and dread. They were spectators of both punishment and theater, of morality enacted through mechanical precision. The rack was not merely an instrument of cruelty. It was a mirror reflecting the fears, ambitions, and secret desires of those who wielded power. History remembers its victims as whispers, their agony fading into legend. Yet the questions linger. What stories were lost to silence? What truths never reached the ears of the living? The rack became a testament to a world where justice and terror were inseparable, and where pain was both message and medium. In a quiet aftermath, the chamber lay in stillness. Candles guttered, shadows lengthened, and the wooden frame waited patiently for its next visitor. The echoes of screams, absorbed into the stone over centuries, whispered faintly, carrying tales of endurance and despair. One could almost feel the memory of stretched limbs, the subtle tremor of nerves tested beyond capacity, the silent courage of those who refused to yield. And in that remembrance, there was a haunting meditation. The rack did more than punish bodies. It stretched the boundaries of human experience itself, reminding us that fear, like memory, is both fragile and eternal. The rack of eternal agony remains not only a device of physical torment, but a symbol, a monument to the shadows of the human spirit and to the voices that never fade, though the world has long forgotten their names. A coffin of iron, silent and immovable, stood in the candlelit dungeons of castles and citadels, its spikes glinting faintly like stars caught in a void of black. It was called the Iron Maiden, though the stories of its use teeter between history and legend, whispered in hushed tones across courts and villages. Its presence was at once alluring and terrifying, a silent sentinel promising a feast of suffering for any who dared oppose authority. How many souls had been claimed within its cold embrace, and how many cries had been swallowed by its metal walls, leaving only echoes of terror behind. The air in these dungeons was thick, damp with centuries of neglect, yet sharp with the tang of iron. Stone walls wept condensation, dripping slowly onto the uneven floors, and torches flickered in wall sconces, casting jittering shadows across the room. The maiden itself stood like a grim idol, its hinged doors ajar as if breathing slowly, patiently. In the darkness, this was the realm of the unseen, where fear had its own language and silence became the heaviest shroud. Nobles and inquisitors alike claimed to witness its power, to feel the weight of its promise, though some wondered if it existed more in imagination than in reality, a shadow of terror, more potent than steel. Legends spoke of those who entered its iron confines. A heretic accused of blasphemy, bound and placed inside the coffin, might have imagined the spikes pressing ever closer, imagining 1,000 pinpricks biting into flesh until the mind surrendered. In paroxysms of fear, a rival noble, ensnared for political treachery, would face the same silent judgment. The claustrophobic embrace of cold metal and the glinting teeth of steel demanded nothing less than total submission. Some accounts describe the door slowly closing, the spikes moving inexorably toward vital places, yet the true extent of the agony remains a shadow, lost in time. Did anyone survive the maiden? If so, they emerged changed, haunted, their silence a testament to the unspeakable horrors they endured. The Iron Maiden served as more than an execution device. It was a symbol, a performance of fear. Courtiers and townspeople would hear of its existence, sometimes glimpsing it behind barred doors, never seeing it in action, yet its mere presence shaped obedience and dread alike. The device was a cruel meditation on the human mind. The anticipation of pain often proved more excruciating than pain itself. Scholars and chroniclers debated its authenticity for centuries, yet even in doubt, the maiden cast a long shadow, teaching lessons in terror, submission, and the malleable boundary between legend and history. Some stories describe the victim's final moments as a dance between hope and despair. The spikes, cold and unyielding, seemed to breathe along with the victim, each heartbeat echoing against iron. Time itself slowed in the chamber, each second stretching into eternity until only a stillness remained, broken by whispered legends and the imagination of those who dared recount the tale. And when the doors were finally opened, empty or not, the maiden stood as a reminder of the power of fear silent, eternal witness to the human capacity for cruelty and the haunting fragility of life itself. Even now, in ruins and museums, the Iron Maiden holds its dominion over imagination. It is a monument not only to suffering, but to the enduring human fascination with terror, a testament to how pain, real or imagined, can shape society's silence, voices, and carve legends that outlive kings, kingdoms, and all who dared to defy them. The wheel waited beneath an open sky in the village square, where cobblestones had been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, both innocent and guilty. It was called the Breaking Wheel, though few ever survived to see the truth of its name. Limbs would twist, bodies would shatter, and the echoes of agony would carry across fields and forests, a grim signal that justice or vengeance had taken form. Who decided that pain should be public, and why did the suffering of one human become the spectacle of many? Across Europe, the wheel left its mark both on flesh and on memory, a testament to cruelty performed in the theater of fear. The square itself was a stage of shadows. Early morning fog curled around the edges of the stone fountain, dripping silently into its basin. That same fog would later mingle with the smoke of torches as villagers gathered, drawn by morbid curiosity and obedience to law. Wooden platforms were erected, ropes hung, and the wheel immense, carved with spokes strong enough to withstand the weight of a body, stood poised to receive its next subject. The accused, stripped and chained, was guided to the base of the wheel, eyes wide with terror, heart hammering in their chest like a drum marking the approach of doom. The crowd, quiet at first, would eventually murmur and lean closer, a mixture of horror and fascination in their gaze. Legends tell of thieves, rebels, and heretics stretched upon the wheel, their limbs threaded between the spokes, sometimes tied to prevent them from moving. The executioner's role was precise. A hammer, a rod, or iron cudgel would strike each limb in turn, breaking bone in a methodical pattern. Some accounts speak of victims contorting impossibly, faces twisted, in silent screams as the wheel spun slowly beneath them. Others were left suspended, arms and legs mangled, exposed to sun and wind, until death claimed them quietly or the crowd's patience waned. The spectacle was horrifying yet ritualistic, a cruel symphony of power and obedience played out in bone and sinew, The emotional crescendo was unbearable. Pain became both instrument and message, a warning carved in the flesh for all to witness. Yet, in some hearts, defiance remained. A few held their gaze upon the crowd, refusing to submit, their silence louder than any cry. For the witnesses, the wheel was both horror and meditation, a reflection on mortality, justice, and the thin line between law and cruelty. In some corners, whispers questioned the morality of such displays, pondering if power was ever truly tempered by conscience, or if it only thrived when terror walked hand in hand with authority. In the aftermath, when the wheel was silent and the crowd had dispersed, the body remained as both warning and legend. Birds circled overhead, pecking at remnants, while the wind carried away the last echoes of pain. Over time, the wheel became a symbol not only of punishment, but of human fascination with suffering, a reminder that cruelty can be both deliberate and performative. History would remember the breaking wheel as more than a tool. It became an eternal spiral, etched in memory, where flesh and spirit alike were twisted by fear, and where the boundaries between pain, justice, and spectacle blurred into an unending spiral of shadow and silence. A metallic instrument, cold and unyielding, rested upon the wooden table of a shadowed chamber. It was called the Pair of Despair, a tool of violation and torment whose design seemed born from the most meticulous cruelty. Though small in size, it demanded fear and anticipation, for it intruded upon the body in ways that shattered both flesh and dignity. The whispers surrounding it were hushed, carried only by those who had glimpsed its purpose or survived its use, and yet its reputation stretched across courts and villages like a dark fog. How many vanished into shameful silence because of it, and how many confessions were wrung from terror that burned hotter than the sun? The setting was dim, a stone room beneath castle walls where torches cast long shadows that danced like restless spirits. The air smelled faintly of smoke and oil, mingled with the damp chill of underground carters. In one corner, the executioner prepared his instruments, each one gleaming with cold promise. The Pair of Despair rested on a velvet cushion, deceptively simple, its shape conical and hollow, designed to expand within the human body with mechanical precision. Every curve of its metal seemed calculated to inflict maximum pain, and its presence alone could reduce a strong man or woman to trembling submission. The accused was brought in, hands bound, eyes wide with dread. The chamber seemed to shrink. Around them, the stone walls pressing closer, the shadows leaning in. Curious and merciless witnesses, history preserves only fragments of its use. Some accounts speak of thieves or adulterers, forced into confessions as the device slowly widened, within them extracting secrets and sins alike. Others describe it as a tool of intimidation, displayed openly to remind the noble and the commoner alike that the body could betray truth, and that shame and pain were inseparable. Victims often disappeared soon after, their fates unrecorded, leaving only silence and rumor in their wake. The Pair of Despair became a lesson not of justice, but of anticipation for the mind. Knowing the expansion, the tearing, the violation often suffered more than the body itself. As the device did its grim work, the room was filled with a quiet terror, a suffocating stillness punctuated by the involuntary gasps of the accused. The executioner worked with methodical precision, unyielding, a dark artisan shaping fear itself. Outside, the castle walls seemed to hum with the echoes of pain, as if the stone absorbed and carried every cry to distant ears. In some cases, the accused emerged, broken and shamed, carrying the memory of their suffering as a weight heavier than chains. In others, they vanished entirely, swallowed by history, their voices forever lost. In the end, the Pair of Despair was more than a device. It was a symbol, an embodiment of the intersection between fear, power, and the human body. Its small metal frame carried an influence disproportionate to its size, shaping obedience, loyalty, and silence. Though few saw it in action, the stories lingered in the imagination like a shadow at the edge of vision, a reminder that cruelty need not be grand to be absolute, that pain can exist both in flesh and in memory, and that terror, once planted, takes root and blossoms across time. In the quiet aftermath, the chamber stood empty, yet the air seemed to pulse with the weight of ups and voices, the sorrow of those who had suffered, and the enduring question, what confessions and secrets were stolen by a simple instrument of fear, leaving only whispers for those willing to remember. Pits of searing liquid waited in the shadows, hidden beneath grates or behind hastily drawn curtains, their surfaces shimmering with a terrible promise, boiling water, scalding oil, and molten tar were the instruments of justice or vengeance within. The labyrinthine castles and town squares of medieval Europe. The air trembled with anticipation, thick with smoke, the scent of heated metal and charred wood, mingling with the faint tang of fear that hung over the corridors like a living presence. How many souls had been lost to this slow, consuming flame? How many legends were born from the screams that rose and were swallowed again by stone and night? The chambers and courtyards where these punishments were carried out were places of paradoxical intimacy and spectacle. Inside, stone walls absorbed the heat and shimmer of fire, reflecting it in flickering patterns across faces pale with dread. Outside, the streets bore witness to whispered crowds, curious and fearful, some drawn by morbid fascination, others by the grim lesson to obey. These were spaces where power was etched into flesh, where authority manifested not in decree alone, but in the terrifying immediacy of suffering. The accused traitors, heretics, thieves were brought forth, stripped, their skin vulnerable, their hearts hammering against the ribs that contained them. The slightest misstep could be fatal. Yet the process was slow, deliberate, designed to etch terror into the mind as sharply as heat scarred the flesh. Legends tell of the slow descent of victims into the fiery embrace, the hiss of flesh meeting liquid, the steam curling upward like ghostly serpents, carrying with it cries of agony. Sometimes oil was poured into cauldrons heated by relentless flame. Sometimes tar, black and thick, licked the air with its pungent sting. Those cast into the depths did not always perish immediately. Some writhed and struggled, their flesh blistering, their screams painting the night with terror. In other cases, mere threats of boiling were enough to elicit confessions, their minds scorched by imagination alone, the human capacity to anticipate. Pain was as lethal as the heat itself, a silent tormentor in its own right. The emotional crescendo of such punishment was a dark symphony of despair. The crowd, whether silent or whispering, or witness to the fragility of life and the omnipotence of authority, some watched in horror, unable to look away. Others looked on in grim satisfaction, feeling a fragile security in the enforcement of order. But even as the victims succumbed to flame, history absorbed their story not only as an act of cruelty, but as a cautionary tale, a reminder that power often flourished most in the shadows of suffering. Long after the fire dimmed and the steam drifted away, the pit remained, a hollowed memory of stone and metal. Birds would occasionally perch upon its edges, curious and indifferent. The wind would stir the ashes, scattering remnants of what was once living and screaming. And in the quiet, the pit seemed to remember, carrying echoes of the past, a testament to how terror could be as much psychological as physical. To this day, when one walks the ruins of such castles, the air seems to hum faintly with those lost cries, a lingering warning of the human appetite for control and the haunting power of fire, boiling and silent over flesh, mind, and spirit. A single point of steel, sharp and unyielding, glimmered in the flickering torchlight, suspended above a stone floor worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The device was known as the Judas Cradle, a name that carried the weight of betrayal, terror, and calculated cruelty. Though simple in its design, its purpose was devastating, to extract suffering slowly, deliberately, turning gravity and human anatomy into instruments of torment. In the stillness of a dungeon or the hushed reverence of a castle chamber, it waited, patient and merciless, as if aware that anticipation was its most potent ally. How many bodies had been surrendered to its slow, inevitable pressure, and how many minds had been broken long before the body reached its limit? The setting for this dark ritual was always intimate, yet suffused with a perverse spectacle. Torches burned along the walls, casting jagged shadows that danced like restless spirits across stone. The air smelled of cold moisture, iron, and faint smoke from a distant hearth. The accused, often heretics, thieves, or rebels, were brought, yet with chains rattling softly against stone. Their eyes darted across the room, seeking escape where there was none, yet finding only the waiting device. The Judas Cradle, a simple pyramid of wood with a pointed apex, seemed almost innocuous at first glance, but its apex was designed to pierce and punish, a cruel precision against the human form. Victims were hoisted, seated upon the point, their weight pressed downward by ropes or sheer gravity, stretching, pulling, and tormenting every fiber of their being. Legends tell of those who endured the Judas Cradle, noblemen accused of treachery, their bodies disciplined by envy and politics, would sometimes sit in silence, their eyes wide with pain, their minds racing with thoughts of betrayal real or imagined. Peasants accused of crimes or heresy experienced a differently, terror that intensified with each slow lowering of their body onto the point, each nerve screaming in protest. The device was mercilessly efficient. It combined slow physical agony with the mental torture of anticipation, a meditation on helplessness, submission, and the fragility of human pride. Some never survived the ordeal, others emerged broken, their bodies altered, their spirits haunted, carrying memories that refused to fade even in sleep. The emotional climax was a study in endurance and despair. Pain became a language, a dialogue between body and gravity, between flesh and steel. Some victims whispered confessions. Others remained stubbornly silent, their defiance and invisible. Rebuke to those who wielded power. Outside the chamber, the faint echo of chains and footsteps created a rhythm of tension and dread. Within, every heartbeat was magnified, every nerve a bell tolling in a cathedral of suffering. The Judas cradle was not merely a tool. It was an intimate observer of fear, a silent chronicler of human resilience and vulnerability. In the quiet that followed, when ropes slackened and bodies were removed, the chamber seemed to exhale. As though releasing the residue of suffering into stone and air, the pyramid remained, pointed and patient, its apex gleaming in the torchlight, a reminder that terror could be precise, slow, and inexorably personal. Even centuries later, walking through the ruins of castles where such devices once hung, one can almost feel the lingering presence of pain, the memory of bodies suspended between life and oblivion, and the enduring lesson that cruelty, when measured with calculation, can leave marks far deeper than any wound. The Judas cradle survives in memory as a monument to human suffering, a testament to how fear, anticipation, and physical torment can intertwine, shaping not only those who endured it, but those who would remember. The ropes hung heavy from the ceiling, coiling like serpents ready to strike, and the chamber smelled of damp stone, oil, and the faint tang of iron. The device was simple in design yet exquisite in cruelty. The strappado. Victims' wrists were bound behind their backs, and they were hoisted high into the air. Suspended above the cold floor, gravity became an unrelenting partner, pulling shoulders from their sockets, muscles stretching beyond natural limits, ligaments straining, until the body itself became a testament to suffering. The silence of the dungeon pressed in, broken only by the subtle creak of rope and the soft shuffle of guards. How many secrets were whispered through clenched teeth, and how many confessions were torn from the depths of fear before the mind could resist. The chamber smelled of cold stone and torches, with shadows that seemed to lengthen and twist in sympathy with the suspended bodies. Outside, faint murmurs of the castle or fortress lingered through corridors, unaware of the torment within, yet the air seemed thick with tension. The accused, sometimes heretics, sometimes rebels, occasionally pawns of political schemes, were brought in shackled, their eyes darting to walls and doors that promised escape but offered none. They were lifted slowly, the body stretching upward, the mind racing with anticipation of pain that had yet to arrive. The executioner's hands were steady, mechanical, precise, the rise and fall of the body measured, deliberate, ensuring every fiber of the human form protested against its restraints. History remembers stories of knights and peasants alike subjected to this torment. One account tells of a man accused of treachery to his king, his body suspended, his shoulder joints screaming under the weight of his own limbs. Hours passed in agonizing silence, punctuated by the soft groan of stretched muscles and the involuntary convulsions of the body. Some confessed, their words trembling between fear and relief. Others remained resolute, enduring until unconsciousness claimed them, their secrets held in stubborn defiance. The strappado was a negotiation of flesh and spirit, a dialogue in which pain was both question and answer, shaping obedience, loyalty, and terror. The emotional climax of this ordeal was not simply physical. It was an intimate confrontation with helplessness, the body twisted in unnatural arcs, the mind oscillating between panic and numbness. Each suspension extracted more than confessions. It stripped dignity, dissolved resistance, and revealed the fragility of human pride. Observers, if present, witnessed more than punishment. They glimpsed the boundaries of endurance, the strange beauty of survival, and the silent rebellion of a spirit refusing to yield entirely to oppression. When at last the rope slackened and the victim was lowered, the chamber seemed to exhale a long, mournful sigh. Limbs trembled, eyes stared blankly at the stone above, and the silence that returned was heavy with memory. Even centuries later, walking the ruins of castles or imagining the flickering torchlight in an empty chamber, one can sense the echo of bodies suspended between life and oblivion. The strappado survives as a monument to endurance and fear, a reminder that agony can be both intimate and universal, that silence can speak louder than cries, and that some secrets are held forever. In the spaces between muscle and bone, in the slow, inescapable pull of gravity itself, the lash cracked through the damp air, sharp and swift, yet it carried more than physical pain. It carried judgment, authority, and fear. The chamber reeked of sweat, blood, and the faint tang of iron, a scent that clung to the stone walls like a stubborn memory. This was the domain of the heretic scourge, a punishment designed to tear both body and soul, wielded against those who defied the church, questioned faith, or challenged the edicts of kings. Whips, rods, and scourges, simple in appearance yet cruel in design, became instruments of confession, tools of obedience, and mediums of terror. How many secrets, prayers, and regrets were etched into flesh as the blows fell, and how many sins lingered beyond the edge of perception, forever unseen but eternally felt? The setting was a vaulted chamber or a secluded courtyard, often chosen to limit witnesses yet still allow the echoes of pain to warn those beyond. Torches flickered along the walls, casting light that danced over arches and rough stone. There, shadows long and accusing, the accused knelt or was bound across a wooden frame, their backs exposed, skin taut and vulnerable. The executioner's hand was precise and unrelenting. Each strike delivered a rhythm of agony that left the body trembling, the mind oscillating between terror, numbness, and the desperate hope for mercy. Outside, the murmurs of the faithful, sometimes hidden behind walls or fences, whispered caution, their imaginations filling in the horrors that unfolded within. Historical accounts describe heretics, blasphemers, and dissenters subjected to this relentless punishment. The whip tore skin from flesh, leaving tracks like dark rivers winding across the body. Rods cracked bones beneath their blows, while smallest scourges, tipped with metal, drew blood with meticulous cruelty. Some confessed under the pressure, revealing both truths and fabrications, while others endured silently, their endurance itself, a form of defiance. Pain became a language here, and the body a reluctant scribe, recording every doubt, every fear, every whispered accusation. The scourge demanded obedience, but it also revealed character, testing the limits of endurance in ways that few instruments could match. The emotional climax was both private and public for the accused. Each strike was a negotiation between surrender and resistance, a confrontation with mortality and faith for the observer. It was a lesson, a reflection on the power of fear to shape behavior and belief. The cruelty was deliberate, but so was its theater. Pain performed as morality, suffering enacted as law. The mind often suffered as much as the body, imagining each impending blow, counting the seconds between strikes, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing upon the chest as heavily as the scourge upon the back. When at last the blows ceased, silence fell like a shroud. The body, bloodied and trembling, bore witness to human fragility, yet also to resilience. Shadows lingered in corners, memories of agony and endurance pressed into stone, into air, into history itself. Centuries later, the heretic scourge survives not only as an instrument of punishment, but as a meditation on fear, faith, and obedience. It reminds us that cruelty can be precise, ritualized, and intimate, that suffering can shape belief as effectively as any sermon, and that, in the quiet aftermath of pain, the human spirit, though battered, continues to endure, holding within it the echoes of cries long silenced, but never truly forgotten. The hammer rose slowly, blending in the dim torchlight, its weight both simple and absolute. The chamber smelled of cold stone, iron, and the faint, lingering tang of old blood, a perfume that clung to the walls and seeped into the floor over centuries. Here, in the shadowed halls of justice and vengeance, the breaking of the bones was enacted, a punishment designed to remind the living of their fragility and the authority of those who wielded it. Limbs shattered beneath the calculated blows, flesh and spirit intertwined in agony. Yet the act was not mere violence, it was a ritual, precise, measured, and absolute. How many lives were marked, how many families haunted, and how many witnesses carried the memory of splintering bones into silent nights? The setting was austere, a vaulted chamber beneath the castle, or a wooden platform in the public square, where stone and timber bore the weight of centuries. Torches flickered against rough walls, shadows trembling as if in anticipation of the suffering to come. The accused, often criminals, rebels, or those unfortunate enough to fall out of favor, were laid upon a table or bound to a frame. their limbs arranged for maximum exposure. The executioner's hand was steady, his tools hammers, iron cudgels, or rods carefully chosen for their purpose. Each blow was precise, a conversation in pain, a question posed to flesh and bone, demanding compliance, confession, or simply the surrender of the human form to authority. Historical accounts speak of rebels accused of betraying their lords, of thieves who stole not merely goods, but dignity, and of peasants ensnared in the labyrinthine rules of medieval justice. Each strike of the hammer shattered not only bone, but also the rhythm of fear, forcing confessions or obedience from those who might have thought themselves invulnerable. Some endured in silence, their bodies a testament to stubborn resilience. Others cried out, the sound echoing through corridors and squares, imprinting terror in the minds of all who heard. Pain became a language, each fracture a syllable, each broken limb a story. Written in the flesh of the living, the emotional crescendo was slow, deliberate, and intimate. The body bent and splintered under the weight of authority, nerves screaming, in silent protest. The mind, tethered to the body by willpower alone, oscillated between shock and numbness, between desperation and the faint hope of survival. Observers, whether silent witnesses in the chamber or villagers leaning over balconies in the square, bore witness to the fragility of human form and the inexorable reach of justice. Fear became ritualized, a tangible entity that settled like dust over the crowd, shaping obedience, loyalty, and the boundaries of action. When the blows ceased, the silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. The body, broken and trembling, became both lesson and relic, a testament to the limits of flesh and the endurance of spirit. Shadows lingered long after the torches had guttered, and the memory of splintering bones became woven into the fabric of the castle, the town, and history itself. The breaking of the bones survives not only as a method of punishment, but as a meditation on the interplay between power, pain, and human endurance. It reminds us that cruelty can be deliberate and ritualized, that authority often demands physical testimony, and that even in suffering, the human spirit leaves a trace etched into memory, stone, and the silent corridors of time. A thin cord, rough against the skin, waited patiently in the shadows, coiled like a silent serpent ready to strike. It was called the garrote, a deceptively simple instrument of death, yet its efficiency was absolute. In the hush of candlelit chambers or beneath the quiet solemnity of a castle balcony, it delivered judgment with a precision that neither fire nor steel could match. Life ended not with spectacle, but with inevitability, the body surrendering, quietly as the mind struggled in final moments. How many rulers relied upon it to silence dissent, and how many deaths vanished into shadowed records, leaving only whispers of betrayal and power. The setting was intimate yet fraught with tension. Stone walls absorbed the muffled steps of attendants, the faint creak of wooden floors echoing like distant warning bells. Torches flickered against damp stone, casting shadows that swayed like anxious spirits. The accused noble or commoner, conspirator or heretic was seated, often bound to a simple chair, while the garrote, a wooden collar fitted with a tightening screw or rope, was placed around the neck. The executioner's hands were calm, methodical, ensuring that the device, in its quiet cruelty, would achieve its purpose with terrifying efficiency. There was no room for escape, no audience beyond the walls to witness the subtle horror. The chamber itself seemed to lean closer, watching, waiting. Accounts from the era tell of conspirators against kings, of rebels who dared to speak truth to power, and of those accused of crimes real or imagined. The garrote was applied, and pressure increased slowly, inexorably. Each turn of the screw tightened the hold on life, drawing breath from lungs and color from faces. Some whispered confessions in their final moments, while others remained stubbornly silent, their eyes wide with terror and defiance. Death arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly, leaving no mark of struggle beyond the faint tremor of a body finally still. In this stillness, cruelty achieved both its function, its artistry swift, precise, and silent. The emotional weight of the garrote was in its intimacy. Pain, fear, and anticipation coalesced in a single moment, demanding surrender from both body and mind. Unlike fire or blade, which raged outward and left echoes across streets and squares, the garrote acted in quiet contemplation, forcing an almost meditative confrontation with mortality. Observers, if present, felt the gravity of life suspended, the thin line between existence and oblivion. The device became a lesson in power wielded discreetly, where fear was internalized and obedience extracted without spectacle. When the deed was done, Silence enveloped the chamber, thick as a shroud. The rope or screw was loosened, the body removed, and yet the presence of the garret lingered, a shadow over those who remained. Centuries later, walking through old chambers or imagining the flicker of torchlight in an empty hall, one can almost feel the memory of quiet deaths pressing upon the air. The garret endures as both instrument and symbol, a reminder that cruelty need not scream to be heard. That power can manifest in subtle pressure as effectively as in thunderous violence, and that the faintest whisper of human life can leave a haunting imprint on stone, memory, and the imagination of those who bear witness long after the body is gone. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the faint sourness of sweat, carrying a chill that gnawed at the bones of those who lingered along in the shadowed corridors. Hunger, slow and deliberate, had become an instrument of punishment, a form of torture that extended beyond the physical into the very recesses of the mind. This was scavenger's hunger, a method less mechanical than the rack or the garret, but no less merciless. It was the invisible hand of suffering, wielded against those who had fallen out of favor with kings, nobles, or the unforgiving systems of medieval justice. How many bodies wasted away quietly, unseen by history, and how many spirits broke long before the flesh surrendered? The setting was often austere, a dark tower room, a damp dungeon, or a secluded cell within the walls of a fortress. Stone walls pressed close, absorbing sound, trapping the faintest groans, and the chill seeped into bones weakened by exhaustion. Victims were left without sustenance, sometimes chained to wooden posts or confined within tiny cells where the light of day barely penetrated. Water, if given, was often cold and insufficient, a cruel reminder of life's necessities while denying the relief they promised. Outside, the world continued its indifferent rhythm. Guards patrolled, doors creaked, and the distant clatter of life echoed faintly through the stone. Within, every passing or lengthened into eternity, each day a deliberate test of endurance, a slow dialogue between human will and the inevitability of decay. Historical accounts speak of prisoners condemned for treason, debt, or dissent, left to linger in confinement until their bodies became hollowed vessels. Some perished in weeks, others endured months, their eyes hollow, skin drawn taut over ribs, minds flickering with visions of food, comfort, and home. As the body weakened, the mind began to fragment, haunted by illusions of sustenance that could never arrive. Desperation became a companion, and the silence of the dungeon amplified the terrors of imagination. Shadows became enemies, the faintest whisper a threat, every moment stretched by hunger into a slow, unbearable eternity. The emotional climax of such suffering was profound. Hunger did not merely punish the body, it invaded the psyche, turning thought into torment. Prisoners wrestled with memories of meals, of family, of normalcy, only to be confronted by the cruel emptiness surrounding them. The mind became a stage where fear, delirium, and hope were played in endless cycles. Those who survived carried with them scars deeper than flesh could show, a fragile body, a mind tethered precariously to the horrors of deprivation, and a soul weighed by the knowledge of what silence and neglect could achieve. When finally released, or when death claimed them, the victims left behind a chamber that seemed heavier, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the years of suffering. The echoes of imagined and real agony lingered, a testament to how subtle cruelty could shape endurance and obedience. Scavenger's hunger was less spectacle than meditation, a study of human fragility, of the mind's vulnerability under deprivation, and of power exercised not with fire or blade, but through the invisible, inexorable grasp of absence. Even now, centuries later, the quiet remembrance of those hollowed bodies stands as a chilling reflection on human suffering. The knowledge that pain need not be immediate or visible to leave indelible marks, and that hunger, slow and patient, can become as fearsome as any weapon, lingering long after the dungeon doors have closed and the world has moved on. The cold metal of the rack gleamed faintly in the torchlight, silent yet expectant, as if it had absorbed the agony of centuries and waited patiently for the next confession. This was the rack of heretical confessions, a device designed not merely to punish the body, but to pry secrets from the soul. Limbs were stretched, joints strained, and sinews groaned under pressure, while the mind trembled in anticipation of unbearable pain. Within these shadowed chambers, questions and answers intertwined with agony, and the line between truth and survival blurred. How many whispered confessions shaped history, and how many cries remained buried, echoing silently through the stone walls of the castles and fortresses that bore witness to such horrors? The chamber was austere, constructed of rough stone, with arches that absorbed sound and torches that flickered unevenly, casting shadows that moved like restless spirits. Along the walls, the air was thick with the scent of sweat, iron, and fear of perfume that clung to both victims and executioners alike. The accused were bound carefully to the wooden frame of the rack, wrists and ankles secured, bodies taut with expectation and terror. The executioner's hands were precise, turning rollers slowly to stretch flesh, watching for signs of imminent collapse or submission. Silence reigned, punctuated only by the subtle groan of rope and the strained breath of the victim. Every movement of the rollers was a question asked in the language of pain, a dialogue conducted between the living body and those who sought knowledge through suffering. Historical accounts speak of heretics, dissenters, and alleged traitors, brought before inquisitors, their loyalty or faith in question. Some endured for hours, limbs pulled beyond natural limits, skin glistening with sweat and tension, faces contorted in a silent symphony of suffering. Confessions were extracted under duress, truths mingling with lies, each revelation shaped by agony rather than honesty. Some victims resisted entirely, their bodies trembling yet silent, preserving secrets that would vanish into obscurity. Others confessed, either to appease the device or to escape further torment, leaving historians with a record that is as unreliable as it is chilling. The emotional crescendo was both intimate and public, for while the torture itself was often conducted behind closed doors, the knowledge of its methods spread far and wide. Fear became a teacher, shaping obedience, devotion, and vigilance. The mind, threatened by anticipation and actual pain, often betrayed itself, revealing truths and falsehoods alike. The rack demanded more than flesh, it demanded the surrender of pride, of secrecy, of human will itself die in this quiet yet relentless theater. Agony became both instrument and message, a force that shaped history as effectively as any law or edict. When the ordeal ended, bodies were lowered, limbs trembling and eyes hollow. Yet the chamber retained the memory of what had transpired. The rack, patient and silent, awaited the next visitor, a constant observer of fear, endurance, and despair. Centuries later, its presence endures in the imagination, a chilling reminder of how power can be exercised through suffering and how truth, once sought through agony, can become a shadow, indistinguishable from the pain that created it. The rack of heretical confession stands as a monument to human endurance, the fragility of flesh, and the haunting lesson that fear, meticulously applied, can command the deepest corners of the human spirit. The skin stretched under the gleam of steel, the knife cold and deliberate in the hands of the executioner. It was the flaying knife, an instrument of terror designed to peel flesh from living bodies, leaving the victim both exposed and eternal in their suffering. The room smelled of iron and sweat, and the stone walls seemed to shiver with each quiet, horrifying incision. To witness it was to confront the fragility of flesh, the inevitability of pain, and the haunting intersection of cruelty and spectacle. How many messages were carved into living bodies, and how many watched in horrified fascination, their memories forever marked by the ritual of agony? The chamber was a cathedral of darkness, vaulted ceiling swallowing torchlight as shadows danced along cold stone. Chains hung from the walls, and wooden frames bore marks of previous victims, each scar a silent testament to suffering endured and endured again. The accused of heresy, treachery, or perceived crimes against crown or church, were stripped and restrained, their skin a canvas for the executioner's grim artistry. The flaying knife, long and sharp, was guided with a precision that left little room for escape. Each cut was slow, deliberate, drawing screams that echoed off stone, bouncing back to haunt the ears of those present long after the act had ended. Historical accounts speak of the ritualized cruelty of this punishment. Noble rebels, peasants accused of blasphemy, and political opponents all faced the methodical torment of the flaying knife. The process was both physical and psychological. Anticipation heightened the senses, fear made every nerve hypersensitive, and the mind raced with visions of flesh being torn away. Some confessed under duress, while others succumbed to shock and despair, leaving their stories incomplete, their suffering preserved only in whispers and rumor. Those who survived were forever altered, their bodies and spirits etched with the memory of pain. The emotional crescendo was unbearable. Agony unfolded like a dark meditation, each incision a question, each scream a language of terror. For those observing, whether guards or courtiers, the spectacle was both warning and fascination, a reflection on mortality and the thin line between obedience and defiance. Pain became a teacher, demanding attention and respect, shaping behavior and belief with merciless efficiency. The room, filled with shadows and the scent of iron, seemed to breathe with the rhythm of suffering, each inhalation carrying memory and dread. When the act concluded, the chamber fell into a heavy silence, punctuated only by ragged breaths and the faint drip of blood onto stone. The flaying knife was returned to its place, gleaming under torchlight, ready to bear witness again. Even centuries later, its presence survives in history and imagination, like a grim reminder that cruelty can be ritualized, that human flesh can be a medium for fear, and that the stories of pain, once inflicted, endure beyond the lives they touched. The flaying knife is more than a tool. It is a symbol of power, terror, and the haunting legacy of suffering that shapes memory long after the executioner has gone. The town square lay quiet in the early morning mist, cobblestones slick with dew, yet the air carried a tension that hinted at horror soon to unfold. At its center, the wheel of public shame waited, wooden spokes worn smooth from countless spectacles, its surface darkened by age and countless stains. Here, justice and cruelty were entwined, displayed not in secret chambers, but in the open air, where villagers, travelers, and courtiers alike could witness the consequences of defiance. Limbs were broken, dignity stripped, and fear etched into the minds of those who dared to cross the boundaries of law or custom. How many lives were marked by this public theater, and how many lessons were carved into memory by the twisting of bone and the jeers of the crowd. The square itself was a stage, early fog wrapped around the stone fountain and market stalls. Curling toward the crowd that gathered with cautious curiosity, torches and braziers had been lit, casting a flickering, almost ceremonial glow upon the scene. The accused thieves, heretics, adulterers, or rebels were brought forth, bound to the wheel with ropes and chains. The executioner's hands were steady, working with the ritual precision of a man who had long since made the suffering of others his craft. The wheel rotated slowly, limbs contorted into unnatural positions, joints pressed to breaking, until cries and gasps filled the square like an eerie symphony. Each twist of the mechanism was both punishment and performance, designed to teach obedience as much as to satisfy the unyielding laws of the realm. Historical accounts tell of countless victims subjected to the wheel of public shame. In some villages, a single offender's torment was a week-long event, with neighbors and officials observing, sometimes participating in the humiliation, and always absorbing the lesson that rebellion or sin would not be tolerated. Limbs shattered, bodies bruised, and yet the spectacle was never solely about destruction. It was about morality performed in flesh, the blending of fear and instruction. Those who survived bore not only physical scars, but the indelible weight of shame, an experience that would mark them for life, while their families and communities internalized the lesson as if it had been carved into stone. Alongside the wheel itself, the emotional crescendo of such punishment was as much for the living as for the condemned. The mind of the victim oscillated between agony, humiliation, and the desperate hope of endurance. For the observers, fear and fascination mingled, a grim meditation on mortality, obedience, and the price of defiance. Shadows stretched across the square as torches flickered, the broken forms on the wheel frozen in the amber light of suffering. Pain, spectacle, and morality intertwined, a ritualized reminder of authority's reach and the fragility of human pride when confronted by the collective gaze of a community. When the wheel finally stilled, silence settled like dust over the cobblestones. The victims were removed, bodies trembling, faces etched with anguish and shame, leaving behind only the memory of their ordeal. The wheel, patient and silent, remained in the square as a constant reminder. Cruelty could be public, obedience performative, and fear a language understood by all who watched. Even centuries later, when markets bustle and festivals return, one can imagine the shadow of the wheel looming over the cobblestones, a testament to human fascination with suffering, the intertwining of punishment and spectacle, and the enduring power of shame to control, teach, and haunt. Claws of cold iron gleamed faintly in the flickering torchlight, each curved spike designed to rend flesh from fingers and toes with merciless precision. It was called the cat's paw of torment, a small but unrelenting instrument of pain, crafted to extract obedience, confessions, or mere terror from those unfortunate enough to encounter it. The device was deceptively simple, yet its cruelty was absolute, a reminder that suffering could be engineered in the minutest details. How many lives were broken, not in the theater of the public square, but in the intimate, Silent rooms where fear gnawed at flesh and spirit alike, leaving scars that words could scarcely convey. The chamber was narrow, stone walls damp with condensation, and the air heavy with the mingling sense of sweat, iron, and the faint tang of burning torches from distant halls. The accused, often thieves, rebels, or individuals who had dared to challenge authority, were seated, bound tightly, their hands and feet exposed to the claws of the cat's paw. The executioner's hands were deliberate, turning screws or adjusting levers so that each spike bit into flesh slowly, drawing pain like a dark melody from every joint. The device was designed to torment without killing, to make the mind quake in anticipation of each new pinch, each slow, deliberate tear. While the body endured the impossible, the silence of the chamber was suffocating, broken only by muffled groans and the faint creak of metal against bone. Historical records recount countless victims subjected to this small but exquisite form of cruelty. Fingers were crushed, toes shredded, skin split along the claw's trajectory, leaving the body marked in both pain and memory. The process was methodical. Sometimes the cat's paw was applied incrementally, prolonging agony over hours, while other times it was used to secure immediate compliance. Survivors were left trembling, their hands and feet irreparably damaged, a permanent testament to both human resilience and the merciless ingenuity of punishment. Some whispered confessions in the midst of torment, others gritted teeth in stubborn silence, enduring each spike as an act of defiance. Pain, in this chamber, became both tool and language, articulating authority, fear, and human fragility in a vocabulary of flesh. The emotional climax was subtle yet profound. Unlike public tortures designed for spectacle, the cat's paw worked quietly, its cruelty internalized, shaping obedience through anticipation as much as through inflicted suffering. The mind became a battlefield, each nerve ending a messenger of dread, each movement a negotiation between endurance and surrender. Observers, if present, were witnesses to the intimate collapse of human pride, the bending of spirit beneath the smallest instruments of terror. Shadows seemed to lean closer, the torchlight trembling in sympathy with the body racked by pain. Its silence itself became an accomplice to the torture. When at last the device was removed, the hands and feet were left trembling, swollen and scarred, carrying the memory of suffering into the dim corridors beyond. The cat's paw, patient and silent, awaited the next subject, an ever-ready arbiter of subtle, precise cruelty. Even centuries later, imagining the device evokes a chilling lesson that suffering need not be grandiose to be absolute, that small instruments can shape both flesh and spirit, and that terror, carefully measured, leaves traces far deeper than any blade or fire. The cat's paw of torment survives in memory as a quiet monument to endurance, fear, and the unyielding creativity of human cruelty, whispering across time that even the smallest claws can rend more than flesh they can pierce. The soul, the wooden frame stood in the center of the village square, darkened with age and marked by countless scars, a silent witness to the rituals of humiliation it had hosted. This was the pillory of eternal mockery, a device designed not to kill, but to erode dignity, to display the accused to the world as both spectacle and lesson. Heads and hands were locked into its rigid embrace, immobile and exposed, leaving the body a canvas for the jeers, spit, and ridicule of the gathered crowd. How many spirits had been bent beneath the weight of shame, and how many voices had been silenced, swallowed by the relentless judgment of peers who were themselves both participant and witness. The square was alive with anticipation. Early fog curled around the cobblestones, softening the edges of market stalls and fountains, yet unable to obscure the tension that radiated from the wooden frame. Villagers gathered cautiously, their faces a mixture of curiosity and dread. As the accused were dragged forward, bound and unresisting, torches flickered along the walls of nearby buildings, casting trembling shadows across the square, while the chill of morning pressed against skin damp. With fear, those placed in the pillory felt time slow, each moment stretched by the combined weight of exposure, expectation, and the relentless scrutiny of neighbors, friends, or strangers whose laughter and scorn became a tangible force against their will. Historical accounts reveal the breadth of its use. Adulterers, petty thieves, dissenters, and outspoken critics were all condemned to the pillory, often for hours or even days at a time. Some endured in silence, eyes lowered, hearts hammered in quiet defiance. Others succumbed to tears or rage, their humiliation amplified by the crowd's reactions. Spit and stone sometimes accompanied ridicule, and the smallest acts of cruelty or mercy from the audience could shift the delicate balance between suffering and survival. The pillory of eternal mockery was as much a social instrument as a punitive one, turning public opinion into an extension of authority and ensuring that shame became inseparable from obedience. The emotional crescendo was both intimate and communal. The victim's mind oscillated between humiliation, despair, and a desperate clinging to pride, while the crowd, invested in the moral lesson, felt fear, satisfaction, or schadenfreude in equal measure. Shadows stretched across the square as torches flickered, highlighting the tension between vulnerability and observation, cruelty and spectacle. The body remained immobile, but the spirit was alive with turmoil, trapped in a collision of flesh, shame, and the collective gaze. When the ordeal ended, the pillory remained, patient and unchanging, its wood absorbing the echoes of laughter, scorn, and tears. The accused were removed, their bodies trembling, their pride diminished yet somehow surviving, leaving behind an invisible residue of suffering that would linger in the memories of all who watched, even centuries later, walking the squares of old villages or imagining the flicker of torchlight on empty cobblestones. One can sense the presence of the pillory, a monument to the power of public shame and the enduring lesson that humiliation, like pain, can shape obedience, morality, and the human spirit in ways far beyond the reach of blade or fire. The table stood, unadorned in the dim light of the dungeon, its surface scarred from centuries of use, a silent witness to the quiet orchestration of agony. This was the torturer's bench, a deceptively mundane piece of furniture transformed into a throne of suffering. Limbs were stretched, joints dislocated, and bodies contorted across its worn planks, each movement precise and deliberate, designed to extract obedience, confession, or mere terror. The room smelled of damp stone, sweat, and iron, a pungent reminder that cruelty often thrives in silence and routine. How many souls had been bent to its commands, and how many stories of endurance were lost to the shadows that clung to the walls? The chamber was narrow, suffused with the flickering warmth of torches that cast long, quivering shadows upon cold stone walls. Chains and straps hung nearby, tools of control that promised pain in measured doses. The accused heretics, traitors, thieves, or political pawns were brought forth, their bodies trembling with anticipation. Each was positioned on the bench with calculated precision, arms pulled taut, legs extended, torsos aligned for maximum leverage. The torturer's hands, practiced and patient, manipulated joints and applied weight in ways both subtle and cruel, testing endurance and willpower. The silence of the room pressed inward, broken only by the occasional groan of strained flesh or the subtle creak of wood bearing the weight of human suffering. Historical accounts describe countless individuals who endured this methodical torment. Knights accused of betrayal, villagers charged with heresy, and conspirators brought low under suspicion were all subjected to its measured cruelty. Some confessed under the pressure of pain, revealing secrets or fabricating stories to end their suffering. Others resisted, allowing the body to scream in quiet defiance, every nerve a messenger of agony and every joint a testament to endurance. The torturer's bench demanded more than physical compliance. It demanded submission of the spirit, a yielding of pride and selfhood under the careful hand of calculated cruelty. The emotional crescendo was intimate and relentless. The body was bent beyond natural limits, nerves ignited with fire, and the mind oscillated between panic and numbness. The torturer, an observer of both flesh and psyche, maintained control over the rhythm of suffering, prolonging agony just enough to teach obedience while leaving room for survival. The room, heavy with the scent of human distress, became a silent theater where authority performed its lesson in fear, endurance, and the fragility of flesh. Pain, measured and meticulous, spoke louder than any edict, shaping belief, loyalty, and memory with an efficiency unmatched by spectacle alone. When the ordeal ended, the bench remained silent and patient, absorbing the echoes of agony as though storing them in its worn planks. Victims were removed, bodies trembling, joints stiff, eyes hollow yet alive, carrying with them the indelible weight of suffering, even centuries later. Imagining the quiet dungeon and the flicker of torchlight on stone, and what evokes the presence of the torturer's bench, a reminder that cruelty need not be grandiose to leave a lasting imprint. It stands as a meditation on human endurance, the manipulation of pain, and the intimate power wielded by those who understood that suffering, when delivered with precision and patience, could command obedience, silence secrets, and etch itself into the memory of the living long after the instruments of torment were gone. The steel claws glimmered faintly in the torchlight, cruel and precise, designed to tear, shred, and extract with methodical intent. This was the Spanish tickler, a device of deliberate torment, infamous for its capacity to strip flesh and dignity alike. Fingers, hands, and sometimes toes were caught in its grasp, dragged along its serrated edges, leaving trails of crimson that marked the slow passage of agony. In its simplicity lay perfection. The tickler could command confession, obedience, and terror without haste, its pain lingering long in the mind of the victim. How many secrets were revealed under its grasp, and how many screams faded into silence, never reaching ears that might have understood the cost of defiance. The chamber was narrow, suffused with the cold dampness of stone walls and the flicker of torches that cast restless shadows along arches and beams. Chains hung like serpents, ready to restrain those unfortunate enough to face the device. The accused thieves, heretics, or those who challenged authority were seated or bound, their limbs exposed to the tickler's jagged claws. The executioner's hands were deliberate, turning screws or pulling levers to ensure maximum effect. Pain arrived gradually, a slow crescendo that consumed the senses, gnawed at nerves, and left the body trembling. Every movement of the tickler was a question pressed upon flesh, demanding obedience while bending mind and spirit alike. Historical accounts speak of those brought before the Spanish tickler in pursuit of confessions or compliance. Fingers shredded, joints strained, and skin torn, victims often revealed truths interlaced with lies, desperate to end the ordeal yet unable to escape the intimate cruelty of the device. Some endured in silence, their defiance etched in each scream held back, their spirits intact even as flesh surrendered. Others succumbed, the mind breaking before the body fully failed, leaving whispers of betrayal or innocence suspended forever. In the shadows of stone and fire, the tickler demanded both endurance and submission, a negotiation conducted in agony and memory, where the body became the reluctant narrator of fear. The emotional climax was both private and total. Each nerve ended in terror, every finger a vessel of sensation and dread, the mind oscillating between resignation and hope, defiance and desperation. Observers, when present, were witnesses not merely to the physical torment, but to the unraveling of pride, the intimate dialogue between authority and suffering. The chamber itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of agony, shadows stretching, torchlight trembling, and silence punctuated only by gasps and muffled groans. Pain, in this ritualized form, became a precise teacher, shaping behavior and belief. Without spectacle, extracting compliance with terrifying efficiency. When at last the tickler was removed, hands and limbs quivered, raw and bloodied, the body marked and the spirit indelibly aware of its fragility. The device, patient and silent, awaited the next subject, a testament to human ingenuity and cruelty, and the enduring power of fear. Even centuries later, imagining its jagged teeth against flesh evokes the intimate horror it wrought, a reminder that torment can be small yet precise, personal yet universal, and that terror, carefully measured and deliberately applied, leaves a trace far longer than any public spectacle or fleeting scream. The Spanish tickler survives as a dark monument to endurance, obedience, and the haunting persistence of human suffering. The steam rose in thick, wavering clouds, curling toward the vaulted ceiling like ghosts of the condemned, carrying with it the scent of oil, water, and scorched flesh. This was boiling alive for blasphemy, a punishment both immediate and prolonged, where flesh and spirit were tested against the unyielding heat of vengeance. Pits of scalding, liquid water, oil, or tar had been prepared with meticulous care, their surfaces shimmering with menace under the flickering torchlight. Those accused of defying divine law, of questioning sacred authority, or of committing acts deemed impious were brought to this fiery judgment, their cries swallowed by the steam and stone. How many lives ended in this slow, merciless ritual, and how many legends grew from the screams that lingered long after the bodies were gone? The chamber, or sometimes an outdoor scaffold surrounded by anxious witnesses, was thick with expectation and dread. Guards held the accused, their hands firm yet trembling with the anticipation of the horror to come. Torches flared, casting dancing shadows across cobblestones, walls, or the wooden beams that framed the pit. The condemned were stripped of protection, their bodies vulnerable to both heat and fear, while the executioners worked with precise choreography, ensuring the temperature would inflict maximum suffering without immediate death. Steam rose, blurring vision, wrapping observers and victims alike in a suffocating embrace. Where anticipation was as tortuous as the punishment itself, historical accounts tell of heretics, accused sorcerers, and blasphemers brought before flames or boiling vats, as warnings to communities and challenges to divine law. Flesh met liquid with a hiss, a violent shudder that reverberated through both body and soul. Some perished instantly, others endured minutes stretched into eternity, their cries echoing across squares and corridors etched into memory like carved stone. Survival was rare, yet even those who escaped bore burns and trauma, their bodies and minds forever marked by the ordeal. Fear spread through the villages, towns, and courts like wildfire, ensuring obedience and silence through both spectacle and whispered legend. The emotional crescendo was unbearable, a meditation on mortality, guilt, and divine authority. The body writhed, nerves ignited with pain, while the mind oscillated between despair, hope, and the numbing disbelief at its own fragility. Witnesses felt the weight of judgment, the intoxicating blend of justice and cruelty, their hearts quickening, in tandem with the screams of the condemned. The punishment was both corporal and psychological, teaching obedience and reverence through terror, shaping communities as effectively as any law or sermon. When at last the victims were consumed by death or removed, the pit steamed on, patient and indifferent, as if absorbing the echoes of agony and leaving behind only memory. Centuries later, walking the ruins of castles or imagining the flames licking against the flesh of the accused, one can sense the lingering presence of this punishment, a meditation on the terrifying fusion of belief, law, and human cruelty. Boiling alive for blasphemy endures not only as a method of execution, but as a dark testament to the lengths humanity has gone to enforce authority, instill fear, and write legends in the language of pain, smoke, and silence. The saw gleamed under the flickering torchlight, its teeth jagged and unyielding, a mechanical predator awaiting flesh to rend. This was the executioner's saw, a device designed not merely to end life, but to do so in deliberate, excruciating stages. Its purpose was both punishment and warning, a manifestation of authority's reach, precise in its cruelty and absolute in its silence. In the shadowed halls of castles or upon raised platforms before gathered townsfolk, it demanded both fear and obedience. How many lives were claimed beneath its teeth, and how many echoes lingered in stone corridors long after the final cut? The setting was grim and meticulous. Stone walls, cold and damp, absorbed the quiet tension of preparation, while torches flared intermittently, casting moving shadows across arches and scaffolding. The accused traitors, rebels, or those who had offended crown or church were secured to wooden frames, their limbs immobile, bodies taut with anticipation. The executioners' hands were steady, guiding the saw with relentless precision, each motion calculated to prolong agony without granting escape. The metal rasped against flesh and bone, a low, terrifying song that seemed to harmonize with the gasps and groans of the victim, filling the chamber with a rhythm of suffering that no eye could fully bear. Historical records speak of countless individuals who met their end beneath this instrument, vertical or horizontal. The saw spared no mercy, breaking bodies with methodical insistence. Some perished quickly, their screams swallowed by the rasp of teeth against bone. Others endured minutes stretched into eternity, the mind oscillating between despair, terror, and the fading hope of survival. Observers, when permitted, stood at the edges of the chamber or scaffolding, faces pale as they witnessed the intimate cruelty, learning in horror the tangible costs of rebellion, heresy, or treachery. The emotional crescendo was deliberate and intimate. Pain became a conversation between body and instrument, nerves igniting with every pass. The mind racked with the anticipation of the next move. Meant, even those who survived were forever marked, not only in body, but in spirit, their existence a testament to human endurance and the merciless application of authority. The room itself seemed to pulse with suffering, the shadows stretching and bending around the figure of the saw, waiting for the next soul to claim. When at last the execution concluded, silence descended, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint drip of blood on a stone. The saw, patient and indifferent, rested, its teeth still gleaming in torchlight, ready for its next ritual. Centuries later, imagining the rasp of steel against flesh evokes a shiver of dread, a chilling reminder that cruelty can be precise, deliberate, and intimate. The executioner's saw survives not only as a tool, but as a monument to terror, authority, and the haunting persistence of human suffering. A lesson carved into memory with teeth as sharp as any command, leaving echoes that will endure long after the echoes of screams have faded into silence. The iron gleamed cold and unyielding, small yet precise, a tool designed to crush and torment with deliberate intent. These were the thumbscrews of endless suffering, instruments of subtle cruelty, where fingers were pressed between bands of metal until nerves, bones, and spirit alike cried out in quiet agony. In the dim torchlight of dungeons or secluded chambers, they extracted confessions, enforced obedience, and left marks both physical and psychological that endured long after the device was removed. How many secrets were won beneath their cruel grip, and how many whispers of endurance slipped silently into history, unheard but indelibly present. The setting was narrow and suffocating, the walls of stone absorbing every sound. Torches flickered along the corridors, casting trembling shadows across chains and hooks, their dark outlines reminding the condemned of the inevitability of pain. The accused, often heretics, traitors, or those caught in webs of suspicion, were seated or bound, their hands extended, fingers exposed to the unforgiving embrace of iron. The executioner's hands moved with careful precision, adjusting screws, applying pressure slowly until each joint, each nerve, and each sinew protested under the relentless weight. Pain arrived gradually, a slow crescendo that sharpened with every tightening turn, leaving the body quivering and the mind on the edge of collapse. Historical accounts recount noble, rebels, and commoners alike enduring this form of torment. Fingers cracked, joints strained, skin split under the pressure, and yet the pain could be suspended, measured, and prolonged, leaving the body intact but the mind shattered. Some confessed to sins real or imagined, trading truth for relief, while others remained silent, their defiance etched into the redness of their knuckles and the tremor of their limbs. In the intimacy of the chamber, the thumbscrews became both interrogator and teacher, a precise instrument of obedience that spoke directly to the fragile boundaries of flesh. In endurance, the emotional climax was relentless, subtle, and insidious. Every nerve ending was a messenger of terror. Every twist of the screw a question pressed into the body, demanding submission. The mind oscillated between panic, numbness, and an almost meditative focus on the impossibility of escape. Observers, where present, often remained at a distance, learning the lesson of obedience not through spectacle, but through the intimate demonstration of vulnerability and pain. Shadows lengthened and flickered, the chamber breathing with the rhythm of suffering. Its silence became a tangible companion to agony. When at last the device was removed, fingers were swollen, bruised, and trembling, the body marked but alive, the mind indelibly aware of its fragility. The thumbscrews remained patient and silent, waiting for the next subject, a monument to the quiet yet absolute power of torture. Even centuries later, imagining their cold embrace evokes both dread and fascination, a lesson in endurance, obedience, and the human spirit's fragile resilience under measured cruelty. The thumbscrews of endless suffering endure as a chilling reminder that pain need not be grandiose to command submission, that subtlety can be as devastating as spectacle, and that the human body, even in small instruments of torment, can speak volumes of fear, defiance, and memory. The chair stood alone in the center of the chamber, deceptively simple, a wooden throne with spikes protruding from every surface, waiting patiently for the arrival of those deemed heretical or defiant. This was the heretic's chair, an instrument of slow, intimate torment, designed not to kill outright, but to bend the body and mind into submission. Flesh pressed against iron, nerves ignited by each point, and the mind, aware of the inevitability of pain, trembled before the first moment of contact. How many beliefs were reshaped, how many wills broken, and how many silent screams faded into shadowed memory beneath its cruel geometry. The chamber was narrow and dim, stone walls absorbing the flicker of torches while shadows danced across the rough-hewn floor. The accused, often heretics, rebels, or those caught daring to question church or crown, were forced to sit, their bodies contorted to fit the unforgiving spikes. Straps and chains held limbs in place, ensuring that every movement, every tremor, amplified agony rather than relief. The executioner's hands were methodical, checking tension, adjusting posture, and observing every flinch, every grimace, as if the chair itself were a living instrument of judgment. Silence reigned, punctuated only by the strained breath of the victim and the faint creak of wooden points against skin. Pain became a conversation, and the body, a reluctant storyteller. Historical accounts speak of the heretic's chair used in towns and castles across Europe, where accusation of blasphemy or dissent demanded corporeal demonstration of authority. Some endured hours or even days, every nerve ignited, flesh marred by iron, mind fractured by anticipation and the relentless insistence of pressure. Confessions were often extracted, either truthful or invented, shaped more by agony than conscience. Others resisted, enduring silently, their will surviving even as their bodies betrayed them. The chair demanded submission, yet it left space for defiance, the human spirit flexing against cruelty even as the flesh conformed to its design. The emotional crescendo was intimate, slow, and suffocating. Pain became a private symphony of sensation and fear, each spike a note, each tremor a chord of agony. The mind oscillated between desperation, calculation, and numbness, while observers rarely close, but always watching learn the weight of authority and terror through the small, deliberate suffering of one human body. Shadows stretched long, across walls, and the flicker of torchlight made the spikes appear alive, patient sentinels of endurance and fear. When the ordeal ended, the body was freed, trembling, raw, and forever marked by the intimate cruelty endured. The heretic's chair remained, silent and eternal, awaiting witness to the fragility of flesh and the persistence of power, even centuries later. Imagining the spikes and the contorted posture of the accused evokes dread a reminder that fear need not be loud, that torture can be private and precise, and that the human spirit, while resilient, can be stretched, bent, and tested in ways both intimate and unforgettable. The heretic's chair survives as a testament to endurance, authority, and the haunting persistence of cruelty that shapes belief and obedience through the language of pain. The cold metal encased the leg like a merciless vice, its surface unforgiving, unyielding, designed to crush both bone and spirit. This was the iron boot of torment, a device of deliberate cruelty, where legs were encased in heavy iron and compressed with screws, until flesh and bone surrendered to the inexorable weight. It was a punishment both slow and absolute, used to quell rebellion, enforce obedience, and instill terror in those who witnessed its application. How many limbs were broken beneath its grip, and how many cries, muffled by fear or leather, were swallowed by stone corridors and forgotten halls? The chamber, or sometimes a raised platform for public warning, was shrouded in cold shadow. Torches flickered along walls blackened by smoke and damp, illuminating the heavy iron tools that awaited their next victims. The accused rebels, conspirators, or those deemed traitors were seated or laid prone, legs inserted into the boots with deliberate care. Screws were tightened slowly, each turn a crescendo of pain that spread from toes to knees, compressing tendons, muscles, and bone alike. Every slight movement threatened unbearable agony, forcing the mind to focus entirely on the slow, escalating pressure while the body trembled in anticipation of further torment. Silence pressed against the walls, broken only by the muted groans of the condemned and the occasional scrape of iron against stone. Historical accounts detail its use across Europe, particularly in times of political unrest or civil disobedience. Some victims endured hours or days, their limbs crushed, bruised, and contorted beyond recognition, often confessing to crimes real or imagined simply to end the slow torture. Others resisted, bearing the weight with grim determination, their spirit clinging to defiance even as the body was mangled beneath cold metal. The iron boot was less a tool of immediate death than a meticulous sculptor of fear, shaping behavior and loyalty through agony applied with calculated precision. The emotional crescendo was unbearable, intimate, and inexorable. Nerves screamed beneath the iron, muscles spasmed with pain, and the mind teetered between delirium, desperation, and numbness. Observers, when present, witnessed both body and spirit in conflict, learning lessons in submission and endurance not from spectacle, but from the measured cruelty of the device. Shadows flickered across walls as torchlight danced over twisted limbs, a silent chorus of suffering and authority intertwined. When at last the boots were removed, limbs were mangled, swollen, trembling, yet alive. Victims carried the memory of pressure, pain, and survival long after their release, while the iron boot remained, patient and silent, waiting for the next challenge to human endurance. Even centuries later, imagining its cruel compression evokes dread, a reminder that authority could be absolute in intimacy. That suffering need not be loud to command obedience, and that fear, applied with deliberate precision, leaves scars far deeper than the eye can see. The iron boot of torment survives as a testament to human resilience, calculated cruelty, and the terrifying capacity of pain to shape body, mind, and legacy. The chamber was cloaked in silence, so thick it pressed against the lungs and seemed to seep into the bones. Stone walls, cold and unyielding, absorbed every whisper, every shallow breath, until the very air seemed alive with anticipation. This was the rack of silence, a device of subtle and absolute torment, Where movement betrayed the soul and sound became both a warning and a weapon, limbs were bound, stretched, and twisted, leaving the body contorted beyond recognition, while the mind teetered on the precipice of endurance and despair. How many secrets were forced into the open, and how many truths were buried forever under the oppressive quiet of flesh and stone? The chamber was narrow, suffused with torchlight that flickered like a restless spirit. Chains and ropes were arranged with precise care, the wooden frame of the rack patient and unchanging. The accused, often political prisoners, heretics, or those who challenged authority, were secured to the device, their limbs extended, joints straining against their limits. Every movement was magnified, every twitch an agony. The executioners' hands moved deliberately, turning rollers with methodical patience, stretching muscles, sinews, and nerves to the edge of endurance. Silence reigned, broken only by the faint creak of wood or the tremor of restrained breath, creating a tense rhythm that mirrored the slow crescendo of torment. Historical records speak of the rack of silence as an instrument of interrogation and control, extracting confessions, compliance, or whispered secrets through prolonged agony. Some succumbed quickly, bodies betraying minds weakened by fear, while others resisted, enduring for hours as nerves and joints screamed in protest. The rack demanded more than physical submission, it demanded surrender of will, patience of the spirit, and a negotiation between flesh and endurance. Pain was not merely inflicted, it was curated, shaped into a language of obedience and fear. Precise in its cruelty, the emotional climax was relentless and intimate. Limbs stretched beyond their natural limits, nerves fired with relentless clarity, and the mind wavered between delirium and conscious calculation, seeking any respite from agony. Observers, when present, were both witnesses and participants, learning the language of fear through quiet suffering rather than spectacle. Shadows danced across stone walls as torchlight flickered, highlighting every contorted angle of flesh. Every tremor of endurance, pain became a dialogue between body, mind, and authority. A slow meditation on fragility and submission. When the ordeal concluded, bodies were lowered, trembling and hollow-eyed, marked indelibly by both pain and endurance. The rack of silence remained patient, unyielding, and eternal, a monument to the intimate, precise cruelty of human authority, even centuries later. Imagining its quiet terror evokes a profound dread, a reminder that silence, when enforced through suffering, could be as powerful and absolute as fire, steel, or spectacle. The rack of silence survives as a testament to human resilience, the fragility of the body, and the haunting persistence of fear applied with deliberate patience, leaving truths and secrets entangled forever in the memory of those who endured. The morning air hung heavy with anticipation, carrying the scent of damp earth, smoke from distant torches, and the metallic tang of fear. In the center of the square, a scaffold had been erected, cruel and methodical, prepared for a punishment that would unfold its stages, each more harrowing than the last. This was the spectacle of hanging, drawing, and quartering, a ritual of cruelty reserved for those accused of the gravest betrayals against crown or country. Flesh and spirit alike would be tested, torn, and displayed, a grim lesson in obedience and the price of defiance. How many bodies were shredded in this ritual, and how many messages were etched into the consciousness of entire communities? Through such calculated horror, the scaffold rose above the gathered crowd, its beams stark against the gray morning sky. Villagers, townsfolk, and officials assembled in silence, the chill in the air sharp against their skin as torches flickered along the edges of the platform. The accused, often traitors or rebels accused of conspiring against authority, were brought forth, their steps faltering, eyes wide with terror. First came the hanging, a suspended moment between life and death, nerves straining under the rope's cruel embrace. Then the body was drawn, torn from limb to limb in a calculated dismemberment that left both flesh and spirit fragmented, a public meditation on mortality and the consequences of defiance. Historical accounts speak of this punishment as both justice and spectacle. Each stage was deliberate, the initial suspension, the slow extraction of confession or compliance, and the final dismemberment that turned the body into a canvas of authority. Limbs were severed, organs exposed, and the remnants of life displayed for all to see. A chilling testament to power and control. Survivors were rare, and those who did endure carried not only scars, but the indelible weight of humiliation, trauma, and the understanding of absolute authority enforced through agony. The emotional crescendo was unbearable, a fusion of body, mind, and spectacle. Nerves screamed under pressure, hearts raced with anticipation, and the mind vacillated between terror, resignation, and fleeting hope. For the crowd, the ritual was both warning and fascination, a meditation on obedience, fear, and mortality enacted in flesh. Shadows stretched across the square as torchlight danced over severed limbs, and the silence between each stage amplified the horror, making the ritual not merely physical, but profoundly psychological. When the ordeal concluded, the body, or what remained, was removed, yet the memory lingered. Etched into stone, mind, and story, the scaffold stood silent, a monument to authority exercised through precision, cruelty, and spectacle. Even centuries later, imagining the slow progression from hanging to quartering evokes dread, a chilling reminder that punishment could be both message and meditation, and that the human body, subjected to deliberate torment, becomes a language through which fear, power, and obedience speak across generations. Hanging, drawing, and quartering survives as a testament to calculated cruelty, the fragility of flesh, and the haunting imprint of spectacle upon memory.